For over 2,000 years, Egypt led the world in technology and design. Once, Babylon was the center of commerce and trading. Imperial Rome was the greatest military power the world had seen. Today, the United States is the wealthiest, most powerful nation that has ever existed. Could America, the superpower of the 20th century, go the way of these ancient empires? The Worldwide Church of God presents The World Tomorrow. Each week, this program gives a unique understanding of the meaning behind today's world news and the prophecies of the world tomorrow. This week on The World Tomorrow, Richard Ames.
Greetings, friends. Today I'm going to ask you a question that's important to everyone watching this program, whether you live in America, Canada, Europe, Australia, Asia, or wherever you are. Has the United States, the strongest, most influential nation the world has ever known, begun to go the way of every other great power and empire of history? Some nations today want to see the United States humiliated and fall from its dominant position in the world. Other nations, America's friends and allies, want to see her remain strong and a leader of the Western world. They worry when they see signs of loss of direction or poor judgment by the United States. Twice her armies intervened to turn the tide in the ruinous world wars. After the Second World War, American industry and American dollars helped get Europe and Japan back on their feet, setting the stage for the world as we know it today. American farmers and American food still make the difference between life and death by starvation for millions all over the earth. American military might has acted as a counterbalance to the other great superpower, the Soviet Union. And at least until recently, an American military presence in Europe and Asia has been seen to be essential for preserving the peace. Love her or hate her, you can't get away from the fact that the United States of America has become the most dominant power of the 20th century, and arguably the most influential nation the world has ever seen. So let me ask you again, is the United States beginning to slip from this position of power? Could America go the same way as all the other great world powers of history? Is America at the crossroads? Now, I know that there are many people who could say, no, that could never happen. America is not like these other nations. It is not a world empire in the same way the ancient Romans were, or the Spanish at the close of the Middle Ages, or the British in the last century. America's prosperity was established not by military conquest and subjugation of other developed nations, but on the principle of liberty and freedom and opportunity. That may be a rather idealistic view, but there's some truth in it. America opened her doors to the poor, the downtrodden, and the oppressed, and offered them a fresh start. It is still today among the most democratic nations on earth, and most Americans still believe very strongly in the principle of freedom and justice for all. Right from the very beginning, there was a feeling by some Americans that their nation had been uniquely blessed and favored by God. In 1783, Ezra Stiles, the president of Yale University, wrote of what he called God's American Israel. And he asked, may we not see that we are the object which the Holy Ghost had in view 4,000 years ago when he inspired the venerable patriarch, that is Jacob, who was renamed Israel, with a vision respecting his posterity? That's a very significant statement. I want to come back to it later. Yes, the United States of America does seem to have been a special, favored nation. Its location kept it far from the quarrels and wars of Europe. The land was full of the raw materials to support a mighty industrial power, and its soil was rich and fertile to provide abundant food for a growing nation to consume and to sell abroad. America is blessed with a river system that links the heartland to fine, warm water ports for year-round commerce. The first census of the American population in 1790 showed there were 3.9 million people inhabiting 891,000 square miles. 100 years later, in 1890, the census revealed a nation 4 times that size and territory and 16 times as populous. Today, the people of America inhabit 6% of the Earth's land surface and are only about 5% of the world's population. But they account today for approximately 28% of the free world's combined gross national product. How is it that so few should have and produce so much? The answer lies in events that happened nearly 4,000 years ago. Remember that quote I read to you a few minutes ago by the president of Yale University about God's American Israel? I don't know if he fully realized the full significance of what he had said, but Ezra Stiles had stumbled across a very significant point of truth. We are accustomed to thinking of the USA as a young nation, but its history and the seeds of its greatness go back deep into the past, back to the times we think of as Bible times. It may sound ridiculous today to relate anything happening to a modern nation to something written in the Bible. That's because even though the Bible is held in high esteem among professing Christians, Jews, and many Muslims, very few really understand the prophecies contained in its pages. Now, the Bible is about 1/3 prophecy, and most of that prophecy has to do with the descendants of the people of ancient Israel. But where are those descendants today? The people of ancient Israel were descended from the 12 sons of one man, Jacob, who was later named Israel. Jacob was the son of Isaac and the grandson of the patriarch Abraham. Abraham was a remarkable man. God had called him his friend. He was a man who learned to obey God, and because of his faith and obedience, he received certain promises from God for his descendants. Let me show you in Genesis 12, verse 1. We read, "Now the Lord had said to Abram, 'Get out of your country, from your kindred, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing.'" Then in Genesis 17 and verse 6, "I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations," notice that's plural, "nations of you, and kings shall come from you." Here was a promise of national greatness made to Abraham. During his long life, Abraham continued to obey God. You know the story of his ultimate test, how he was willing to sacrifice his beloved son Isaac on Mount Moriah. Well, after Abraham had proved his faithfulness, God made the promise of national greatness unconditional. Here in Genesis 22 and verse 16 we read, "By myself I have sworn, says the Lord, because you have done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only son. In blessing I will bless you, and in multiplying I will multiply your descendants as the stars of the heaven, and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gate of their enemies." After Abraham's death, his son Isaac inherited these astounding promises, and in the process of time they were passed on to his son Jacob. Jacob was given a vision one night of a ladder reaching up to heaven. In this vision, God told Jacob in Genesis 28, verse 14, "Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and the south. And in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And later we see how God gave Jacob more detail of how these extraordinary promises would be fulfilled. Notice it in Genesis 35 and verse 11. "Also God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body." Notice that. A nation and a company of nations would be descended from Jacob, later renamed Israel. Many years later, when Jacob was near death, he passed these very special birthright blessings on to 2 of his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph. Abraham is given a promise of national greatness and blessings by God. He passes the birthright on to his son Isaac, who passes it on then to his son Jacob, whom God later renamed Israel. Israel had 12 sons, but before he dies, he passes the birthright and his name Israel on to Ephraim and Manasseh, the 2 sons of Joseph. In this way, these 2 young men, Ephraim and Manasseh, became the inheritors of the promises made by God to Abraham. Now on that day long ago, when the patriarch Israel passed his birthright promise on to his two grandsons, something very interesting happened. And believe it or not, it had a great bearing on the history and the future of our modern world. Let's look at it in more detail in Genesis 48 and verse 1. Now it came to pass after these things that Joseph was told, "Indeed, your father is sick." And he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. We can picture the scene as the old patriarch arose upon his bed and spoke to Joseph, who, you remember, had become a powerful ruler in Egypt. The aged man Israel said, "And now your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, two of Jacob's own natural children, they shall be mine." After adopting the two young men, Israel proceeded to pass on the promises of national greatness upon Ephraim and Manasseh, as though they had been his own sons. But notice what happened. Because the old man was nearly blind, Joseph tried to guide him, so that his right hand was to Manasseh's head, since he was the firstborn, and the left hand to the head of the younger Ephraim. The custom was that the right hand, signifying the major blessing, went to the eldest. But notice, the old man Israel deliberately crossed his hands, placing the right hand on Ephraim's head and the left hand on Manasseh, and then he blessed them. "The angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads. Let my name be named upon them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." Now Joseph protested when he saw his father place his right hand on Ephraim, the younger, and reached out to stop him. And Joseph said to his father, "Not so, my father, for this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But the patriarch Israel told Joseph that he knew what he was doing. Verse 19. But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his descendants shall become a multitude of nations." Ephraim was to become a multitude of nations, while Manasseh was to become one great powerful nation. What was God's purpose in doing this? He wasn't playing favorites, but he is working out a plan, and he had chosen the people descended from the patriarch Israel to become a model nation. He would bless them and make sure that they attained a position of power and influence in the world. They, in turn, were to use that power and influence to set an example of the right way of life for all people. In Deuteronomy 7, verse 6, we read, "For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth." This wasn't favoritism. With the blessing came a big responsibility. If ancient Israel obeyed, they would continue to be blessed. But if they disobeyed, they would be cursed and suffer a decline and eventually a fall and national disaster. This is what happened. Practically from the start, the people of ancient Israel turned aside from God. After warning them time and again through his prophets, God kept his word, and ancient Israel was invaded and taken into captivity and exile. What happened to the astounding promises God had made to Ephraim and Manasseh? These promises were not fulfilled before the time that ancient Israel was taken into captivity. Had God gone back on his word? Now at this point, I want to offer you a free book that goes into this subject much more deeply than I have time for on this program. It shows you the amazing promises God made to the people and what really happened to ancient Israel. The title of this book gives you a clue: The United States and Britain in Prophecy. And it is some of the most intriguing and important information you have ever read. This book shows what happened to the people that God had promised so much to. It describes the master key to understanding prophecy. Chapter titles include "The Lost Master Key Has Been Found," "Prophecies Closed Until Now," "Children of Israel Become Two Nations," "Birthright Withheld 2,520 Years." This book also discusses what will happen in the very near future, with chapter titles which include "And Now What?" The prophecies for the immediate future. What's prophesied to happen now to America and Britain? This gives you absolutely vital information you need to have. This free book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, is in full color with illustrations and helpful maps. Did you know that over 7 million people around the world have already received their free copy? Be sure to request your free copy. which I'll be offering again at the end of today's program. Now let's continue our discussion with the biblical account of America's promised national greatness. God blessed the people of ancient Israel so that they could become a model nation for the world to observe and imitate. But ancient Israel never became that model nation. After the death of King Solomon, the nation divided into two nations, the northern 10 tribes retaining the name Israel, and the two southernmost tribes taking the name of Judah. As a result of their national sins, God removed the northern 10 tribes, the nation of Israel, from the promised land by the hands of the Assyrians about 721 BC. Notice 2 Kings 17, verse 18. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and removed them from his sight. There was none left but the tribe of Judah alone. The southern kingdom of Judah was taken into captivity and exiled over a century later by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. We know what happened to them. They lived in exile in Babylon until that empire was conquered by the Persians. Then numerous Jews returned to the land of Judah to reestablish their nation. They never became a great nation or a company of nations, but at least their history is known. Many of their descendants still live there today in the modern state of Israel. But it isn't all Israel. What happened to the other 10 tribes? This is one of history's greatest mysteries. An entire people seem to have vanished from view. But the children of Israel didn't vanish from the face of the earth. Remember, God's promises to Abraham were unconditional. And even though the promises of national greatness and material wealth were never fulfilled in ancient times by the two birthright tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, God could not go back on his word. In Amos chapter 9, verse 9, we read that even though the northern 10 tribes of Israel would go into captivity and exile, they would not cease to exist. For surely I will command and will sift the house of Israel among all nations, as grain is sifted in a sieve, yet not the smallest grain shall fall to the ground. Even though the 10 tribes of Israel were to be punished for their sins, exiled and sifted through other nations, the people would nonetheless be preserved to eventually receive the special promises God had made. Bible prophecies show that there would yet be a time when God would restore the fortune of Ephraim and Manasseh to become the company of nations and the one great nation that the old patriarch Israel had foretold so long ago. God kept his word right on schedule. One of the most remarkable prophecies of the Bible foretold that the promised blessings to Israel would be withheld for a period of 2,520 years. I don't have time to go into that detail today, but it is thoroughly explained in this free book I offered you earlier, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. But right on schedule, about 200 years ago, two nations, Britain and the United States, began to have those promises fulfilled. The descendants of the other tribes of Israel were also sifted among the nations. God had not lost sight of them either. They are to be found among the peoples of France and other nations of Northwest Europe. These peoples have been blessed by God. Their nations are among the most prosperous and developed in the world. And even as they share in the blessings, they will share the guilt and the consequences of disobedience to God. But the promise of becoming a great nation and a company of nations was the particular blessing for Ephraim and Manasseh. Britain became the great company of nations that was Ephraim's destiny, and the United States became a wealthy and powerful single nation, as was promised for the descendants of Manasseh. The British people spread out all over the world and settled in new lands that have become important nations in their own right: Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and part of South Africa. At one stage, the British ruled a quarter of the world, an empire on which the sun never set. In the 19th century, the United States increased its power and its territory, and by the end of the century, just over 100 years from its birth, it was counted as one of the world's great powers. After the Great War of 1914 to 1918, America became the single most important world power, and her power and influence grew even more after the disastrous Second World War. It wasn't just a series of lucky breaks that suddenly catapulted Britain and America into their positions of world leadership. It was because God was fulfilling the promise that he had made thousands of years before to the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to Jacob's son Joseph. History may have lost sight of Joseph's descendants of Ephraim and Manasseh, but God didn't. Just how they came to be in their present land is a fascinating story, one we will cover in other programs in this series. It's also covered in detail in this free book that I'm offering in connection with this program. But now I want to go back to my original question: could the United States, the great modern superpower, fall? The answer is yes, it could, and yes, it will, unless it makes some very great changes. Remember, America's blessings came from God, and with those blessings comes a great responsibility. In the book of Leviticus, God reminded ancient Israel and that nation's modern descendants of their awesome and great responsibilities. If they obeyed, they would be blessed.
If you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and perform them, then I will give you rain in its season. The land shall yield its produce, and the trees of the field shall yield their fruit. You shall eat your bread to the full, and dwell in your land safely. I will give peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none will make you afraid. For I will look on you favorably, and make you fruitful, multiply you, and confirm my covenant with you.
But if they disobeyed and did not fulfill the very special responsibilities of being God's chosen and favored nation, they would suffer the consequences.
But if you do not obey me, and do not observe all these commandments, I will set my face against you, and you shall be defeated by your enemies. Those who hate you shall reign over you, and you shall flee when no one pursues you. I will break the pride of your power. I will make your heavens like iron, and your earth like bronze. And your strength shall be spent in vain. For your land shall not yield its produce, nor shall the trees of the land yield their fruit. I will bring the land to desolation, and your enemies who dwell in it shall be astonished at it. I will scatter you among the nations, and draw out a sword after you. Your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste.
That is a very sobering warning for us. And the modern descendants of the patriarch Israel's grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, are already experiencing the beginning of these curses Moses warned about 3,400 years ago. They were prophesied to suffer economic problems. Their agriculture would be in trouble. Families would fall apart. Crime and violence would increase, and their standard of living would begin to fall. There would be mounting troubles in government. They would be turning their backs on God and His laws. Look at what is happening today in America, Britain, Canada, Australia, and the other descendants of these two grandsons of the patriarch Israel. Things are not going well, and they are going to get worse. The descendants of ancient Israel are making the same mistakes as their forefathers by disobeying God, and they will suffer the same fate. So America today, like Britain, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the other descendants of Manasseh and Ephraim, find themselves at a crossroads. God is beginning once again to withdraw His blessings and protection unless we turn once more to Him and His ways. If we were to do that, things would change. See what God inspired Jeremiah to write in chapter 18, verses 7 through 8. The instant I speak concerning a nation and concerning a kingdom, to pluck up, to pull down, and to destroy it, if that nation against whom I have spoken turns from its evil, I will relent of the disaster that I thought to bring upon it. But the lesson of history is that most people will not heed the warnings of prophecy until it is too late. And so the sad answer to the question, can this modern superpower fall, is yes, it can. And unless it changes its ways, it will. Now, I'm not talking about events in the far-off, distant future. Many of you watching this program today, in fact, probably most of you, are going to live to see these things happen. You need to know more. You need to understand what is behind the decline in confidence in the USA, why the world's most powerful nation is beginning to fray at the edges, why things seem to be going wrong. You need this free book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy. It will give you a dimension and understanding that you need to make sense of today's world news. These are dangerous times. You need to know what is going on and what you personally can do. This free book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, describes the master key to understanding prophecy. Chapter 1 is entitled, The Lost Master Key Has Been Found. Chapter 2 is entitled, Prophecies Closed Until Now. Yes, now in this end time, Bible prophecies regarding the United States and Britain are open, clear, and understandable. The last 2 chapters of the book discuss what will happen to America and Britain in the very near future. Chapter 13 is entitled, And Now What? The Prophecies for the Immediate Future. Chapter 14, What's Prophesied to Happen Now to America and Britain. This section gives you vital information you need to have about Britain and America and how this will affect other countries as well. Over 7 million people around the world have already received their free copy. Now, we have nothing to sell on the World Tomorrow program. All of our publications are free of charge, no cost, and no obligation. We never have and never will ask our viewers for contributions. All you need to do is go to the telephone, and for the cost of a local call, please telephone 008-074-222. That's 008-074-222, and request the United States and Britain in prophecy. We have many operators waiting, but if you don't get through right away, call us again in 10 or 15 minutes. That's 008-074-222. We'd also like to offer you a free subscription to the Plain Truth magazine. It's published in 7 languages and read by more than 20 million people. The Plain Truth magazine explains world news and current events in the light of Bible prophecy. It also includes articles on the family, social problems, and world trends. So, for a free subscription to the Plain Truth and this free book, The United States and Britain in Prophecy, please telephone 008-074-222. That's 008-074-222. Or, if you prefer, you may write to The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. That's The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. Next week, David Hume will be discussing the subject of prophecy. To many, the book of Revelation is one of the least understood and most perplexing books of the Bible. It's filled with mysterious symbols, foreboding creatures, and frightening images. Do the prophecies of the book of Revelation have any relevance for us today? Be sure to watch Unlocking the Book of Revelation next week. Until next time, then, this is Richard Ames for The World Tomorrow. Goodbye, friends.
For the free literature offered on this program, write The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. Or for the cost of a local call, please telephone 008-074-222. That's The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. Or for the cost of a local call, please telephone 008-074-222. The preceding program and all literature were produced and sponsored by the Worldwide Church of God.